All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mike King, and I'm one of the pastors here at Suburban, and quite honestly, after that, we should probably just call it a morning and go home. But unfortunately, you're going to have to put up with me for a few minutes, cold and all. Now, we have been doing our very best this morning through song and through art and through some of the images that we have around us to tell the Christmas story in as many different ways as we can. They're working on that right now, I'm sure. But one of the things that I want you to think about is just the person of Jesus. Okay, so Jesus is such an important person in the Christian faith that the New Testament contains not one, not two, not three, but four different biographies of Jesus. And this morning, I want us to take just a minute and look at how Matthew, one of the authors of those biographies, tries to tell the story of his birth. But to get started with that, I want to ask you a question. If you were given the job, like if somebody came up to you and said, I need you to write the biography of a person, the question I want you to think about for a minute is, where would you start? I mean, if you had to write somebody's life story down, where would you start to tell that story? Now, if it were me, I would probably start by talking a little bit about that person's family tree, the parents and the grandparents, try to describe the family that they were born into. And that's exactly what Matthew does in his biography of Jesus. He starts out by walking us through the family tree of Jesus. So in fact, these are the very first words in his biography. It says, this is the genealogy, right, the family tree of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So Matthew decides to start this by talking about Abraham, and that's a great place to start because Abraham is a really important person in history. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but there are three different major world religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, that all look to Abraham as this sort of pivotal, very important person. So Matthew decides to pick Abraham, right, a name that's got some weight to it, and he starts the family tree there, and then he just walks us through the different generations of names that go between Abraham and Jesus. And I've got to warn you, some of those names are pretty weird. Right, so you start reading and you read a verse like this where you see these names. You read that Ram was the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab was the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon was the father of Salmon, and Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Now, those names sound a little bit weird to us, but I think if we probably all stop and think back to our family tree, if we go back far enough, we've probably got some strange names in our family tree too, don't we? Like, especially, just take a minute and think about the people that you come from. Especially if you go back to like your grandma or your great-grandparents' generation, that's where the names get a little funky sounding to us today. So for example, my great-grandfather's name was Alonzo Broadus King, right? And I had an uncle Zeno in that generation. My wife had an uncle named Dode and another great-uncle named Kermit. Now, it's not this Kermit, but you get the idea, right? It doesn't take a lot of digging for us to realize that we've all got some strange names in our past. But one of the things that I think is so cool about Matthew's biography of Jesus is that he includes all of these names, not just to give us the family tree, but also to teach us a very, very important lesson. And that lesson is this. Matthew wants us to see at every turn of the page of his biography that God shows up in unexpected ways. That God works through unexpected people. That's the lesson that you see in these names. So for example, if you look back in these names and you read the name of a man named Jacob, right? And Jacob is an unusual name to have in this family tree because it turns out that Jacob was the younger of two brothers. And back in that day, younger brothers didn't count for all that much. It was the older brother who got to carry on the family's name. It was the older brother who was always picked whenever there was something cool or neat that would have to happen. So for the name of a younger brother to show up in the family tree, well, that's pretty unexpected. Another unexpected thing that you see in these names is that as you read through this list, you realize that Matthew's family tree contains the names of women. And again, while that may not seem strange to us today, it was unheard of back in that day to include women's names in the family tree. Because again, a lot of men in that day and age, they just didn't see women as being all that important or all that valuable. They really didn't count for official things like record keeping and family trees. In fact, you may not know this, but did you know that in Jesus' day, women were not allowed to testify in court? Because their testimony didn't count. They weren't considered to be reliable witnesses. So it was just really crazy. Like any reasonable person back in that day, when they were writing a family tree, they would never include the names of the women. But Matthew includes not one, not 2, not 3, but 4 names of different women before he even gets to Jesus' mom. And, maybe you're thinking, okay, well, maybe these women were like really, really special. Maybe these are the kind of women that you would make an exception for. Like if Mother Teresa was in your family tree somewhere, you'd find a way to work her in, right? Well, that's not what's going on with these women. I mean, Ruth, for example. Ruth was a foreigner at a time when foreigners were not particularly welcome in the people of Israel, right? Bathsheba cheated on her husband. And Tamar and Rahab lived the kind of lives that you don't hear talked about in church very often because they're really much more fitting for like TMZ or Jerry Springer or something like that. No, Matthew didn't include the names of these women because they were really fine, wonderful, upstanding citizens. He included the names of these women because he's trying to make a point. And that point is that God shows up in unexpected ways. He makes that point over and over again. In fact, you see it again at the very end of this chapter through the name of a person that probably sounds a lot more familiar to us. In the very last verse of the chapter, we read this. We read that Joseph took Mary home as his wife, but he didn't consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son. And he gave him the name Jesus. Now, how many of you guys have ever heard the name Mary before, right? Right, Mary is a lot more common in our world than Aminadab. Right? Most of us probably know a Mary. My mom's name, in fact, is Mary. But even though he uses a name here that's a little bit more familiar, Mary is a very, very unexpected choice. And again, just a question that I want you to try to answer for yourself. If somebody gave you an assignment, if they said, hey, I want you to go through the whole world, and I want you to pick someone out to be the mom of the most famous person who will ever live, right? The mom of a person whose life is going to change the course of human history. Who would you pick for that job? I mean, maybe you would pick somebody really famous. I don't know, maybe you'd pick a princess, or maybe you would pick someone who's just really accomplished, like a great business leader or a politician, like the president of a country. You would want the mom to sort of be up to the job. But God works in unexpected ways. Right? He picked Mary. Mary was a nobody. Mary was a kid. Mary was a poor teenager who lived in this backwater, nowhere town in the Roman Empire. But God picked her because God always shows up in unexpected ways. That is what he has been doing from the beginning. He's always breaking the norms. He's always coloring outside the lines. On that first Christmas, really what God said was, I'm going to send my son into this broken world because I want every single person to be able to live the full, free life that I created them to live. But I don't work the way the world works. So I'm not going to send my son in a way that the world expects. I mean, we all know, because we grew up in this world, how things are supposed to work. We hear the lessons, right? That if you want to live a good life, if you want to get ahead, you got to work hard. You got to study hard. You got to be better. You got to do better. You got to focus on number one and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But that's not how God works. Right? That's never how God has worked. Remember, as far back as Jacob, he was doing things differently. He was picking the younger brother. Now, God says in our world, you don't get ahead by bragging about how much power you've got and using it to keep other people down. No, in our world, the people who get ahead are the ones who choose to love and serve others. In our world, you get ahead by putting other people's needs ahead of your own. Right? God has always done things differently. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that he chose to send his son in a very unexpected way. And why did he do it? Why did he send this son into the world? In the same first chapter of his biography, Matthew answers that question as well. And he does it by using a couple of names. Near the very end of that story, we read that Joseph was given a message. He said, Joseph, you've got to give this baby boy a name that's going to have a lot of meaning, that'll show people what he will do. So he says this, he says, Joseph, you're to give him the name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. Right? That's what the name Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew means. It means God saves. And then a little bit later, Matthew mentions, there's another name that we could call Jesus as well. We could call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that's the reason. It's all right there in the names. Jesus, God saves. Emmanuel, God with us. Right? Christmas is God showing up in unexpected ways to be near to us, to save us, right? To bring us home. That's what Christmas is really all about. It's God drawing near to people who had drawn away from him. It's God leaning in to people who maybe had leaned away from him. So here's a question that I want you all to wrestle with. As all of us, as we kind of leave 2017 in the rearview mirror and we head into 2018, the question I want you to think about is, where is God going to show up in your life in an unexpected way this year? Because, he's been doing it for thousands of years. I wouldn't put it past him. He's going to do it for you as well. Maybe this year for you, God may show up in an unexpected way in a relationship, somebody that you can really reach out to and care for. Maybe that's a neighbor or a friend or a coworker or a classmate that God's going to give you some opportunities to really love and serve and care for them. Maybe the unexpected way that God's going to show up in your life this year is by giving you an opportunity to serve a person, a family, our world, our community, to serve in a way that you've never imagined before. Or maybe you're here this morning and you're just really not all that interested in God. Maybe you've never heard much about him, or maybe you have not liked what you have heard, so you are kind of actively leaning away from him, drawing away from him. Well, I wouldn't at all be surprised if God showed up in your life in an unexpected way this year. I just really wouldn't put it past him. So the question I think all of us need to wrestle with is this: when God shows up in our lives in an unexpected way this year, how will we respond? This morning, we're celebrating the fact that 2,000 years ago, Jesus came. God showed up in our world in an unexpected way, in the form of a baby, born into a very poor family in a backwater town in the Roman Empire. But he wasn't just any baby, right? He had a name. Jesus, God saves. Emmanuel, God with us. God leaning in to us to bring us home. To close out our time together this morning, I want you guys to go ahead and, if you got those candles on the way, you can go ahead and get them ready. What we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and light the central candle in the Advent wreath, which we call the Christ candle, which just reminds us of the fact that on that Christmas morning, Jesus came into our world and he was born. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to light this candle off the Christ candle. And then I'm just going to carry that down to the front, and I'll light the candles of some of the folks who work and help out around here. And they're just going to head down the aisles, and they're going to light the candle of each person on the end of the row, and then we'll just ask you to turn and sort of pass the light down and light the candles of the people next to you. And it really does work out a little bit better if you leave the lit candle upright, and as you're lighting your candle, if you kind of come in from the side to do that, it makes it a little easier to light with these. But as we do that, we're going to listen to some music, and then we're going to sing the song Silent Night together. And we're going to close out this time this morning with just this wonderful picture. Hopefully this is the memory that you can take with you of what happened when light came into the darkness of our world, when God showed up in a completely and totally unexpected way.
from the view up here. It's an incredible thing. Well, God bless you. On your way out, there are baskets you can drop off your candles after you blow them out. Let's not leave them lit. But really, God bless you. Have a wonderful and amazing Christmas with your family and having a wonderful week as well. And so God bless you.